The other day, I was at the Conservative Convention in Vancouver with a couple of thousand of my rowdiest friends, and I saw an old fella that I hadn't seen in a while since I knew him from conservative politics. His name is Mark Cameron, and he supports a carbon tax, and yet he is a conservative. And we talked a bit, and he said, Ezra, you're wrong. I said, well, no, that's not true. You're wrong. And I said, well, let's just take the debate onto the Rebel, and ta-da, here we are. Joining me in studio is Mark Cameron. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Ezra.
Well, you're the president of something called, let me get this right, you're the executive director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity.
That's right.
And you're for a carbon tax, which to me is like chickens for Colonel Sanders. You can't be a conservative if you support the carbon tax. You say you can be, so we're going to have a debate today.
Absolutely.
We agreed in advance that we'll give you equal time, and you get the last word, and we're going to try and sort things out. It's not just going to be insults, there may be one or two, but we're going to try and do our best to have a thoughtful debate for conservatives, which are our viewers.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ezra.
Okay, well, thank you. I was just joking around about the insults. It's nice to see you again. Let's start, if we can, with what we can agree on, okay?
Sure.
And let me start by conceding the obvious, that the Earth's climate changes. Anyone who's heard of the ice ages and knows that we're not in one now, we're emerging from one now, knows that the Earth warms and cools. So we can agree on that. Whether or not mankind affects that is in dispute. Whether or not Canada has any measurable effect is in dispute. Whether or not we can change that is in dispute. And whether or not taxing Canadians can change that is in dispute. So the one thing I will concede as an opening statement is that, of course, the climate changes. But to ascribe that to my SUV or your tax policy, I think is hubris or merely covering up a tax grab. So that's my opening gambit. What do you say, Mark?
Well, I don't think that's much of a concession. I mean, obviously, the Earth's climate changes over geological periods of time. The question is, has the climate been changing more rapidly than it otherwise would have in the post-industrial age? And I think the evidence is pretty clear that it has, that it's an ongoing process. But over the last 100 years, temperature seems to have gone up by about 1 degree, which correlates with the rapid growth of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So, correlation and causation, that's always a contentious issue. But it's pretty clear that over the last century, something has happened and appears to be continuing to be happening.
I don't want to spend a lot of the time on the science because neither of us are scientists. What we really want to talk about is should conservatives get on board with this. I would just say in a small counterpoint that even the United Nations itself, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, refers to what they call a hiatus, a 20-year gap. You brought a few slides today that you wanted to show.
Sure. And
let's put up one right now where you talk. Let's put up one that shows climate over the last 150 years.
Sure.
And this is your chart that you brought to us here. It's not sourced, but that's okay. I can see the red line, which is temperature, shows that basically the temperature is stable. It's not growing, whereas carbon dioxide is.
Sure.
That's what the UN calls a hiatus, right?
The hiatus was probably from 1998 to 2012. 1998 was a high temperature year. It was an El Nino year, and temperature basically plateaued for a number of years. And there's a debate about the hiatus. But actually, 2015 and 2016 have spiked again. And 2016 is also an El Nino year. So if you look at the last couple of years' data, it actually shows that the chart is going straight up again. So, and I'm not going to attribute that to carbon dioxide. It's obviously climate is a much more complicated system, but there is a relationship. I think that's the consensus of most scientists, is that there's a relationship between CO2 concentration and temperature.
Well, I note that this chart also starts from 1850, which is a bit of cherry picking too. I talked about emerging from the Little Ice Age. If you would have drawn this back another 500 years or 1,000 years, you would have seen a cooling coming out of the medieval optimal. I mean, I don't want to get into the stats, but I think that the kind of jiggery-pokery we see in ClimateGate, hide the decline, the kind of scandals there, I think that any conservative should be skeptical of government-funded scientists.
So let me talk exactly about that. There is a scientist named Richard Muller, who's a nuclear physicist from Berkeley, who was part of the people who exposed the hockey stick graph and hide the decline and all that, who defended Ross McKittrick and others who were taking that position. And he said, you know what, I want to look at this myself. So he went back and he looked at all the data, added about 20,000 additional data points, went back about 50 years further than the IPCC had done, and essentially came out with data confirming the IPCC report in a study funded by the Koch brothers. So the independent people who've looked at this have reached the same results.
All right, let's stop talking about the science. I think we both gave and took a little bit there. I think any conservative should naturally be skeptical about politicians relying on science, or 97% of scientists say, especially when they're government funded. Let's move away from that. The second theme that you propose we talk about today is that a carbon tax is a desirable what? A desirable way to do what, Mark? To change the Earth's climate?
For start, it's a desirable way to have taxation. I mean, I assume you're not an anarchist who think there has to be some taxation, and most conservative economists will say that a consumption tax that is essentially optional, you pay for what you choose to buy, is better than an income tax or a payroll tax that you're essentially forced to pay.
Okay, so let me try and figure out why you're supporting a carbon tax. Are you supporting a carbon tax just because you're one of those unicorns, a conservative for taxes, or are you someone who believes that this carbon tax will change the climate?
I believe that it can change consumer behavior and industrial behavior, which can reduce CO2 emissions. Changing the climate is obviously a bigger task. Canada can't do that alone. But if there was a global price on carbon, or at least in the industrialized countries, then yes, it would change the climate.
Okay, so you think that bringing a carbon tax in Canada would change the climate?
Not in and of itself.
I mean, even if all the countries in the world brought in a carbon tax, even if China suddenly decided, India, all these countries which have explicitly said they're not going to.
Yeah.
How much would that change the climate?
If all the major industrialized countries brought in carbon pricing at sufficient levels, you probably would be able to hold the carbon dioxide concentrations below 450 and hold the temperature change below 2 degrees. It would be a huge challenge geopolitically, but I think it is possible.
Okay, so you've cited a number of studies earlier. Is there any study, and I've never found one, and I've done access to information requests in the Ontario government, the Alberta government, and probably have some in the Canadian government. This is your business now.
Sure.
You're a conservative for carbon taxes. That's basically who you are.
Sure.
Is there any study, and if there was, I bet you'd know it, that shows how carbon taxes will stop the climate, will stop it at a certain point? You say 2 degrees. Can you point to any study anyway? Just tell me, and I look forward to looking it up.
I take a look at the International Energy Agency 450 scenario from 2010, which essentially does modeling for what would have to happen to energy in the economy in order to keep CO2 concentration to 450, which is what people say would keep it 2 degrees.
Okay, so you're saying that the carbon tax would not stop the world from warming?
Not the Canadian carbon tax in and of itself, no.
And even if all the world's countries were to if China were to miraculously say, we're going to change our policy and bring in a carbon tax, you're saying that would not stop the world from warming, it would actually warm it to 2 degrees?
It would warm it less than it would otherwise.
And how much less is that?
Well, right now, people are saying we're on track for probably 3 or 4 degrees warming. So this would be.
Who's saying that?
IPCC, most the consensus of scientists.
So how long? So how soon would it change the world's climate?
Well, by mid-century to the end of this century. I mean, obviously, it's happening on an ongoing basis, but it's happening little by little.
Okay, I'm a skeptic of what you're saying.
Absolutely.
I have never seen a study, and you know what is telling to me? That these studies aren't even done. That the Alberta government they're not even pretending to say what you're saying. Like, they're not even going through the motions of studying it. They know that Alberta's carbon tax will not change the world's weather by 1 millionth of a degree. They're not even pretending.
Alberta's carbon tax in and of itself would have a very small impact, if any, on global climate change. It would require
and same with a Canadian.
It would require a global effort. But
so should we wait? Should we wait for the others to have this mysterious conversion, this miraculous conversion, or should we go? Since you're basically conceding, even if the whole world got involved, the world's still going to go up in temperature by several degrees. And I think you're conceding that if we act alone, there will be no difference in the world's climate. Why should we tax ourselves and destroy our most prosperous industry when we know for a fact that even if we accept I'm skeptical of your science, but I'm not going to be mean to you. Even if we accept your theory is contingent on China saying, yeah, we're not going to industrialize. We know they're going to.
Yeah. Well, two reasons. One, I think Canada does have a global responsibility, and that countries like China and India, they look at what countries like Canada and the U.S. and Australia do. It's a game, game theory. They're tit for tat. They're looking at what other actors do. So I think that does have.
Why aren't they looking at us and sort of laughing that we would tax ourselves?
No, I mean I think China is actually, they've got a huge smog problem in China, so they are actually beginning to deal with this for reasons maybe other than climate.
Dioxide.
But shutting down coal plants will have the same effect.
So you think China's going to shut down coal?
I think they want to produce a lot less coal in the industrial regions of China because it's basically killing their own people, and they know that.
So now you think but they're opening up new coal-fired power plants every week.
Sure. I mean, China's got huge energy needs, but China is actually moving to less carbon-intensive forms of energy.
But hang on, are they opening new coal-fired power plants or are they not?
They are, but they're also opening more nuclear, more renewables, more everything else.
Okay, so they're not reducing their carbon footprint.
They're reducing their carbon intensity. They're not reducing their overall carbon emissions.
In fact, the amount of carbon they're going to increase is going to triple over the next 50 years.
Those numbers are, well, I'm not sure about triple, but they're certainly projected to go up till about 2030.
Okay, so you just conceded that China, which is already the largest carbon dioxide emitter in the world, every week probably is growing by the size of our entire carbon emissions. Not every week. Certainly every year, China adds another Canada.
Yeah, I think currently that's true.
And you just conceded that they're going to keep doing that into the foreseeable future. So why would we bring a tax on ourselves for the conceit that's going to change carbon in the world, or that China's going to follow our example? They're a dictatorship.
The second reason is I actually think the carbon tax, well designed, is a good form of taxation. It's better than income taxes or payroll taxes.
I want you to choose, though. Is this just about another tax grab, which I think it is, or is this about changing the weather, changing the climate?
It's about both, but I don't think it's going to. Canada's actions in and of itself won't change the climate. I will concede that. But
aren't we already the cleanest country in the world, really, considering how industrialized we are? Why would we tax the cleanest folks in the world instead of deal with the? I don't even think carbon dioxide is dirt.
Sure.
Why would you add another layer of taxation on the cleanest energy producers in the world instead of on the dirtiest folks? Why would you pick on Canadian taxpayers first?
For one thing, I don't think a properly designed carbon tax is going after the energy industry. It's actually going after consumer behavior.
That's not making me feel any better because I'm a taxpayer.
Well, but you've got to pay taxes on something. Do you want to pay taxes when you buy milk at the grocery store? Do you want to pay taxes on your salary?
I think we're paying enough taxes.
I agree. That's why we support a revenue-neutral carbon tax, where every cent raised in carbon taxes would be reduced. It would be offset by tax cuts from other taxes.
Has there ever been a new tax like that in the history of the world, where another tax is being reduced as promised?
British Columbia is I think, the clearest example. They reduced their corporate income taxes, they reduced their personal income taxes, and they gave a tax credit to low-income families. And they've actually given more money back in tax cuts than they've taken in carbon revenues.
And their carbon emissions are up.
Their carbon emissions declined from 2008 to 2012 when the tax was being brought in. It's gone back up since because the tax has been frozen. But there's pretty strong evidence that carbon emissions went down between 5 and 15%.
Well, I've been to Vancouver, and everyone just drives across the border to get their gas in Bellingham to avoid that carbon tax.
If you're living in White Rock, maybe. If you're living in Vancouver, that's a long way to go to buy gas.
Pretty busy Costco gas station. Listen, I'm enjoying this argy-bargy. I think our disagreement on the science is not important. Mm-hmm. I think our disagreement I think actually we have some surprising agreement that Canada bringing in a carbon tax will not change the climate at all, unless, even if the rest of the world got involved. According to your theory, the globe will still warm. And I think we both concede, or at least you've conceded, that China and India and the rest of the developing countries will continue to build coal double, triple for the foreseeable future. So even if, that fantasy scenario won't happen. So will you concede, in closing this first segment, that the carbon tax you propose in Canada will not make any difference to the climate at all?
Well, as I say, the difference it could make would be as part of a global agreement, not in and of itself.
I mean, since there is no global.
Well, there's the Paris Accords, which obviously all countries have taken.
But that's not an agreement to reduce emissions. That's just an agreement to report.
Every country has taken targets of what they're going to try to reduce.
So will you agree with me that if Canada were to bring in a carbon tax, it would not change the world's climate at all?
On itself, yes, absolutely.
You would agree with me?
Yes.
All right. I thank you for that concession. I'm just getting warmed up, you know.
Right, absolutely.
You're a smart cookie. You're making me work. We're going to take a short commercial break. We're talking with my friend Mark Cameron. He's the Executive Director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity, or as I've just nicknamed them, Conservatives for a Carbon Tax. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to get into the real argy-bargy, which is how could a good conservative, like my friend Mark, be saying such things? That's next on The Rebel. All right, welcome back. I'm not being as prickly as I hoped I would because I'm with an old friend, Mark Cameron. He's the boss of Conservatives for a Carbon Tax. Is that your official name?
Canadians for Clean Prosperity is actually the name.
Is there a difference? Are you doing anything else after going, other than going for a carbon tax?
Yeah, we've actually been working on municipal waste in Ontario, trying to make sure that producers are paying the full cost of waste. There's other issues we've looked at as well.
There's a lot of people in Canada who emit carbon. Every human, because we exhale it. Every human's made of carbon. Carbon is the sixth element on the periodic table of the elements. Taxing carbon seems to me to be a trick. Taxing air. I mean, it's just an excuse for a tax. How could a conservative propose that?
If you agree that there has to be taxes on something, I think most conservatives would agree that taxing consumption is better than taxing income or taxing work.
Don't we already have a GST, though?
We have a GST, but our GST is 5%. Our income taxes, the top marginal rates are about 48%.
So why wouldn't we just raise the GST?
Well, a lot of conservative economists have proposed that.
Would you agree with that?
If it could be done as a tax shift from income taxes, perhaps I would. But carbon taxes are another way of making a shift from taxing income and taxing saving and taxing investment to taxing consumption.
But, I mean, you use the word tax so much. It's because you're not as well trained as Justin Trudeau, who says carbon pricing, or Rachel Notley, who says carbon levy. You admit it's a tax. You admit it's a way to make money. But don't conservatives say tax less, get rid of taxes? Why would you be proposing more taxes? Isn't that contrary to the conservative belief in smaller government?
I'm proposing cutting taxes. I'm proposing cutting the taxes that are less efficient and hurt the economy more.
So you're doing Stéphane Dion's green shift.
Stéphane Dion had a lot of things in that green shift that were not simply about tax cuts. There was a lot of social spending under the guise of tax cuts.
Didn't you work with me on the 2008 campaign for Stephen Harper, where we criticized Stéphane Dion?
But at that time,
hang on. I mean, you were there.
Sure.
So you and I was a volunteer in the Tory War Room in 2008. It was one of the best experiences of my life. And you and I think, fought against Stéphane Dion's green shift. So what are you doing now? What was your transformation?
Well, two things. At that time, we were talking about a cap and trade deal with the United States. That was also part of the platform of the Conservative Party in 2008. We didn't like Stéphane Dion's green shift because it was essentially an income transfer from Alberta and resource-producing regions to Quebec and the Maritimes, which we didn't agree with. And there was a lot of social spending that was being done there. If they had done a BC-style carbon tax, it would have been much more difficult to criticize.
I'm extremely skeptical.
I've noticed.
But not just of the science. I want to be very fair to you, and that's why I want to give you equal time, and that's why I want to have a sit down and not make this a 5-minute thing. And I know this is a terrible thing to say because I know you are a man of principle, a man of faith. You're a great family man. I don't know you that well, but what I know about you I really like. I honestly admire you. And yet I have trouble believing that you believe it. I have trouble believing that you are a conservative who believes in global warming, so we have to bring in a carbon tax to fight global warming, and we need a carbon tax. And I mean, where's your funding come from? Who is your boss? Who's motivating you?
We're funded by private philanthropic donations from Canadian sources. No government funding. No corporate funding.
Like, who would be behind you?
They're private individuals. There's no.
Do they have an axe to grind?
They believe in this policy. We're funded by our supporters the way you're funded by your supporters.
Well, we have thousands of supporters who give us, most of our people come to our website for free, and we have thousands of supporters who give us $8 a month. And I'm my own boss. I don't, Lord help us, I don't answer to anyone other than my own conscience and our people. So I am beholden to no one. There is no single donor to our company here who has given us more than 2% of our annual revenue. And I'm not a lobbyist. Are you a lobbyist?
I am registered as a lobbyist in several provinces, yes.
How about the federal government?
I'm, to some extent, I'm a federal lobbyist as well. But most of our work has been at the provincial level.
Okay, but are you registered as a federal lobbyist?
Not currently, but I am registered in Ontario and I believe in Alberta.
Weren't you lobbying at the Conservative Convention?
That wasn't lobbying, and there's a pretty strict definition of what lobbying is. I was there as an observer at the Conservative Convention.
You weren't proposing policy changes there?
I was certainly discussing policy ideas, but there's nothing that would meet the federal definition of lobbying.
Did you talk to any designated public office holders, like any MPs or senators?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
About these ideas?
I had lots of conversations over the weekend.
Do you think you should register those with the lobbyist commissioner?
To the extent that they were, they have to be prearranged meetings on a specific subject. There's a definition of what lobbying is, and we certainly comply with all the federal lobbying laws.
Now, I heard that you had a meeting with part of the Alberta Conservative Caucus. Is that true?
The PC caucus or the
Federal Conservative Caucus?
We met with several MPs from the Federal Conservative Caucus.
When you say we, who's we?
Myself and other people from our organization have also met with Conservative Caucus members. Yeah.
And did you register this with the lobbyist registrar?
I'm not registered federally right now, but
the other people at your meeting registered?
The other person wouldn't have had to have been registered, but in any case, we will be fully compliant with federal lobbying laws.
Now, was there a meeting with some or all of the Alberta caucus?
No. We were meeting with several Alberta MPs, but not the entire Alberta caucus.
And was that in Ottawa or was that the Vancouver Convention?
In Ottawa.
And did you request that meeting?
Yeah, I'd actually spoken with some people in the leader's office who said it would be good for me to come in, and we arranged the time for me to come in.
So did you set it up, or did they request you to come in? Like, I'm just wondering, you're lobbying.
It was mutual, but I mean, essentially, I was saying the same things to them that I'm saying to you.
Who initiated it?
To be honest, I'd have to go back and look at who spoke to who first. It was after about a couple months of talking with people.
I was a registered lobbyist for 18 months, and it's a painful thing to reveal who pays you, who you're meeting with, what you're pitching. It's a painful thing to fill out those forms. I did it as a lobbyist.
We've done those forms for Ontario and Alberta.
You think you should do one federally?
If we are not compliant with federal lobbying law, obviously, but I don't believe anything we've done would actually meet the threshold of lobbying at the federal level.
Now, I got a good old buddy named Monty Solberg. I love Monty so much. He's been a friend of mine for 20 years. I see he's on one of your advisory boards.
Sure.
Is he paid by you guys?
He's not, other than expenses or travel, he's not paid by us.
Is he paid by anyone else, or does his lobby firm get paid by you? How about Stockwell Day?
No, Stockwell Day wasn't paid anything.
Has Stockwell attended your events?
He attended one of our events, yes.
And does he get an honorarium for that?
No, we actually haven't paid anything. He was in Vancouver, so there was no travel or expenses involved.
Now, he's attended a lot of your events, hasn't he?
Stocky's only attended one event, actually. Monty's attended a lot of our events.
And he's doing this just for free? He's not being compensated?
He believes in this issue and believes it's something that Conservatives have to be involved in.
How many staff do you guys have?
We have 4.
And I mean, you're a man with a family. You're a senior advisor. That sounds like a budget that's 7 figures.
We're not 7 figures, but we're
high 6
figures. 6 figures. Sure. Yeah.
I don't know anyone who would give high 6 figures without some goal, some political goal.
Sure, the goal.
You won't say who it is, and you're not registering with lobbyists, Commissioner, and you're being very vague. And this goes back to my terrible question that I put to you, is that I'm a skeptic. I know enough about you to know that you're an honorable man. I admire you. But what I see here is jiggery-pokery. Let me put a theory to you, and you swat it down.
Okay.
And I promised I'm going to give you equal time, and I promise I'll give you the last word, because I'm asking you really tough questions.
Sure.
If I was, let's say, the president of an anti-oil, anti-pipeline, anti-carbon extremist group, like the Ivy Foundation. The Ivy Foundation funds every anti-pipeline group in this country, as you know. If I wanted the best bang for my buck for $1 million, I could give that $1 million to Greenpeace. That's more of the same. Or I could hire Mark Cameron, conservative credentials, get Monty Solberg involved, conservative credentials, get Stockwell Day involved, have a booth at the Conservative Convention, and my $1 million is going to go a lot further if I can pretend, sock puppet style, I'm a conservative and I want the carbon tax. Oh, me too. We're the grassroots conservatives at the Conservative Party event, and we're lobbying you. You won't even give me the details, and that's part of my. So, the fact that you're not telling me who the dough is.
Well, I can tell you right now.
I think you're a gun for hire.
I can tell you right now.
How about Mr. Lurie of the
I can tell you right
Ivy
now, Bruce Laurie on the Ivy Foundation is a member of our board of directors, but we are a not-for-profit. We're not a charity. Foundations can only give to registered charities. We have not received any money from the Ivy Foundation. Our money comes from private individuals. We have not received any money from the Ivy Foundation, I can tell you that.
So are these private individuals who've put in hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, you say it's not millions, do they have a stake in green energy schemes? Do they have a stake in wind turbines or solar panels?
Not directly.
Not directly?
No. In fact, there's one of them has invested in some of those companies, but they're not. But he doesn't stand to benefit from the imposition of a carbon tax.
Okay. So if one of your donors has a stake in a green energy company, solar, wind?
There's neither, actually, but I don't.
Biomass,
I don't,
whatever it is.
Yeah.
So some experimental scheme that would probably benefit from a government subsidy or a green shift. So he's paying you to lobby as a conservative. Don't you think you should say who it is and sort of say, yeah, I'm a conservative, I really believe in this, but as a form of ethical disclosure, I'm being paid by this guy who's got a stake in biomass or whatever it is.
Ezra, we don't have an obligation as a not-for-profit. If we were a charity, we would have an obligation to report. We don't report on our donors. All I will tell you is that we don't receive any corporate, foundation, or government support.
So these are individual tycoons, and you say they're Canadian. Is any money coming through some sort of third-party launderer?
No money's coming from other countries.
So
no money's coming from Tides.
How many guys?
There are basically 5 or 6 high net worth people who've given money.
So 5 guys kicking in 6 figures each. You don't think you should disclose that just so people know who? I mean, wouldn't that make your case stronger? Because you could say, look, here's who's behind me. I'm telling you I believe this stuff. I'm telling you I believe the science. I believe the economics. I believe the politics. And I'm confident that you'll trust that I believe in this because I'm not hiding who's behind me. Like, doesn't that undermine you? I believe you. I want to believe you because I want to believe you're just a wayward conservative and we're on opposite ends of the spectrum and we can have a tug of war. But if you're not telling me who's funding you, how can I get rid of my doubts that a good, honest man who's now whose party is in opposition needs to make a living to pay for his beautiful family, and he's found 5 high net worth people.
There's other ways I could be making a living. I had a good job before I was doing this job. This is not about money. The people who are donating to this cause are donating because they believe in the cause.
And one guy happens to have investments in green tech. Who are the other guys? Are they political? Would they be public names?
A couple of them, I wouldn't say any of them are public names. A couple of them would be more widely known than others. But there's no. We're fully compliant with the laws. We're not for profit. We're not a charity.
Sorry, if I imply now, I think you might want to double check the law.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Let me tell you, I was a lobbyist for 18 months. There's a lot of strict rules there, especially if you contact an MP. I'm not. So that's over here. I'm not saying taking money from these private guys is illegal. I'm just saying that to be politically compelling, I am so curious now, Mark. Who's behind you? Like, I'm just bursting with curiosity.
I can tell.
Because because to me, if I knew they were just regular guys who cared about the public policy world, I'd say, okay. or even if they were sort of dreamer, futurist, like that guy from Tesla or Peter Thiel, I'd say, okay, these are dreamer, futurists, they're throwing a few bucks around. But how do I know it's not like the Canadian George Soros or something? Or, more scarily, just some green tech lobbyist who's looking for you to rig the rules for him.
I can understand.
Don't you think
I can understand your how you feel about this. I don't have the permission to go and name donors to our organization on
a show on the spur of the moment. I think you should go back and ask your bosses for their consent. Just having everything out in the open is a liberating feeling. Okay, I want to ask you one last question, and then I'll give you your final word. Okay, my last question is this. And I'm just, you suggested this, and let's take 1 minute on it, and then I'll give you a minute to say whatever you want in closing, okay? You said you want to make the case for why it would be politically advantageous for conservatives, federal and provincial, to move in this direction.
Sure.
I would say, Mark, this would demoralize a lot of conservatives who are against taxes, who are skeptical of the science. The base of the party in Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, where fracking and oil sands would be punished by this. I think no liberals would come over to the conservatives because they wouldn't want a faint second choice. They would want the most robust environment. Like, there's no way the conservatives are going to out environmentalist Catherine McKenna or Justin Trudeau. So can you, in 1 minute or 2 minutes, make the case for why the Conservative Party would actually grow its vote as opposed to losing its base?
Well, I would have rather spent the last 5 minutes talking about that than debating our funding sources.
All right, I went down that rabbit hole.
But I would say that when you look at younger Canadians in particular, that this has become a threshold issue. It's not. It's not simply a right-left issue. It's a basic issue that most Canadians under 30 would take for granted, that you have to have an issue on climate change. We looked at the results of the last federal election in 2015 and 2011. And did a large comparison study using the same group that does the Vote Compass survey for the CBC, has about 500,000 interviews. There were about 20% of people who voted Conservative in 2011 that voted for other parties or stayed home in 2015. And of that group, 50% of them were strongly concerned about climate change and agreed with carbon pricing. So there was a large chunk of the Conservative vote from 2011 that did not vote Conservative in 2015. And it's younger people, it's women, it's urban and suburban voters, it's the voters that the Conservative Party would need to get back in the game. I think that's why you see Patrick Brown doing this in Ontario, that this is something that will allow him to reach the suburban middle class vote that the Conservatives have not been able to penetrate provincially in the last couple of elections.
Mark, I would come back, but we've used so much time, I want to be respectful of your time, and I think I've given you equal time. I asked you some tough questions, some prickly questions. You answered me as much as you felt you could. I want to leave you now with the final remarks. Is there anything you want to rebut? Any points you want to make? Is there anything I did that was unfair that you think you should set the record straight?
What I'd like to say, we never really were able to get into the discussion about the advantages of carbon taxes as opposed to other kinds of taxes and the tax cuts that you could actually deliver with a well-designed carbon tax. I mean, and that's really what I think it makes this interesting for Conservatives, is the fact that you could cut corporate income taxes by 1 or 2 or 3%. You could cut personal income taxes by 4 or 5%. You could reduce. You could provide tax credits to families or low-income consumers. British Columbia has been able to return billions of dollars in tax cuts, has the lowest marginal tax rates in the country because they have a carbon tax that offsets it, and the carbon tax is completely voluntary. You pay for what you drive, for what you burn. You don't pay on what you earn and what you save. So it's a better form of taxation. Most conservative economists, whether it's folks like Gregory Mankiw or Jerry Taylor, the former research director of the Cato Institute, would say that this is a superior form of taxation, and it allows you to cut other taxes that are far worse for the economy.
Mark Cameron, Executive Director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity, appreciate you giving so much of your time and answering some questions, not just about the policy, but about your own organization. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.